The CEO arrived at the airport early as usual, moving with calm confidence. He had learned over the years that rushing never helped, and he liked to be prepared. Today, he was traveling for an important business meeting, one that could change the course of his company. His mind was already going over the notes he had reviewed the night before. He carried a small, neat briefcase, and his phone was organized with every detail he might need. Despite his high-profile position, he preferred to keep things simple and professional. Boarding the plane was smooth. He nodded politely to the gate staff and moved down the aisle with a steady pace. His seat was by the window, and he settled in quickly, arranging his things efficiently. As the plane took off, he put on his headphones and opened his laptop to make final adjustments to his presentation. Around him, the cabin was filling with a mix of passengers, families, business travelers, and a few students heading home. The atmosphere was typical, a combination of excitement, nervous energy, and the soft hum of the plane. The flight attendant assigned to his row came by with a practiced smile. At first, he thought nothing of it. The smile seemed polite enough, but he noticed a slight change in her tone when she spoke to him. There was a subtle dismissiveness that he had seen before in situations where bias was present. He chose to ignore it at first, not wanting to make an issue out of a small thing. He had learned that sometimes it was best to observe quietly before reacting. When the meal service began, he politely requested his food. The flight attendant brought over a tray and set it down in front of him with a small nod. He looked down at the plate and immediately noticed that something was wrong. The food had visible mold on it. He frowned and lifted the tray slightly, inspecting it. The bread had green spots and the vegetables looked spoiled. It was clear that the meal was unsafe to eat. He called the flight attendant over, pointing to the mold. He explained calmly that the food was not edible and asked if it could be replaced. Instead of apologizing, she gave a short, dismissive response and muttered something under her breath that sounded rude. He could not be sure, but it carried a tone of contempt, a subtle hint of bias he had encountered too many times before. Other passengers nearby glanced over, sensing the tension. Some whispered to each other, while others avoided looking directly, unsure of what to do. Despite the embarrassment, the CEO remained calm. He did not raise his voice or make a scene. He documented the situation quietly, taking a photograph of the moldy food and noting the time and details. He believed in handling situations with professionalism, and he knew that evidence was important if the incident escalated. His calm demeanor contrasted with the flight attendant's impatience, and it caught the attention of a few nearby passengers who were silently rooting for him. Another crew member approached, sensing the discomfort. The CEO explained the situation politely, showing the photograph and describing the interaction with the flight attendant. The other crew member nodded, understanding the seriousness of the matter, and promised to bring it to the attention of the lead attendant. The CEO returned to his work, adjusting documents and making notes, but he kept a watchful eye on the interaction. He wanted to ensure that the replacement meal was handled properly and that the disrespectful attitude did not continue. The flight continued, and the CEO observed the subtle behavior of the attendant. She avoided his eyes when she passed by, spoke in curt tones, and seemed to ignore his requests unless they were unavoidable. He noticed the impact on other passengers as well. A young mother struggled to get attention for her child, and the attendant appeared impatient. The CEO quietly intervened when necessary, using his polite tone to guide interactions without escalating tension. He understood that a flight was a shared space, and he wanted to maintain calm for everyone on board. As the hours passed, the CEO reflected on the incident. He had faced discrimination before, in both subtle and overt forms, and he knew that staying composed was the best approach. He thought about the importance of addressing bias in a way that demanded accountability, but did not compromise professionalism. He considered the impact of his response, not just on himself, but on the people around him who might witness the situation. His experience had taught him that true leadership involved both strength and grace. The moment came when the replacement meal was finally brought. The tray looked clean and properly prepared. The CEO thanked the crew member who had delivered it and began to eat, but he did not relax completely. He continued to observe the flight attendant, noting her behavior for the record. He wanted to ensure that when the flight ended, the matter could be addressed appropriately. He was determined that negligence and disrespect would not go unchecked. Throughout the flight, Other passengers began to notice his composed handling of the situation. Some offered subtle nods of approval, while others whispered words of encouragement to one another. The CEO remained unaware of the small ripple he was creating, focused on maintaining his own professionalism and preparing for the upcoming meeting. He knew that once the plane landed, there would be an opportunity to ensure that accountability was enforced. By the time the descent began, the CEO had completed most of his work. He packed up his laptop and briefcase neatly, placing everything in order for a smooth exit. He glanced out the window at the city below, feeling a mix of anticipation and resolve. He knew the flight attendant would likely be called to answer for her actions, and he prepared himself to address the situation calmly but firmly. His focus was not on revenge or confrontation, but on setting things right in a professional manner. As the plane touched down, he remained seated for a moment, observing the cabin and taking note of the mood. Passengers around him seemed relieved that the flight was ending without further incident. He checked his documents one last time and made mental notes of everything that had occurred. He knew that accountability required clarity and evidence, and he was ready to provide both. Finally, as the plane came to a complete stop, he stood and gathered his belongings. He moved with quiet confidence, nodding politely to those around him. The crew member who had assisted him earlier gave a small smile, acknowledging the CEO's professionalism and patience. The CEO stepped into the aisle, prepared to address the situation with airline management. He knew that the way he handled this moment could set a precedent, not just for himself, but for anyone who had faced similar disrespect and bias. Every step he took toward the exit was measured, calm, and deliberate. He was ready to ensure that justice was served, but in a way that reflected the dignity and composure that had carried him throughout his life. This flight had tested his patience, but he had remained steadfast. The CEO knew that standing firm in the face of injustice was not just about confronting the present situation. It was about creating a standard for the future, one that demanded respect, accountability, and professionalism for all. As the CEO moved toward the aircraft door, he felt a calm determination. He had remained composed through the flight, but now he knew that action needed to be taken. The incident with the moldy food and the attendant's subtle disrespect could not go unaddressed. He wanted to make sure that the airline understood the seriousness of what had happened, and that there were clear consequences for unprofessional and biased behavior. At the jet bridge, he was greeted by a few ground staff who were curious about the situation. The CEO politely asked for the airline's on-site manager. Within minutes, a woman in a sharp uniform arrived, introducing herself and shaking his hand. She offered a polite smile, and the CEO could tell she was ready to listen. He appreciated that she appeared to be taking him seriously, unlike the flight attendant, whose dismissive tone had created tension on the plane. The CEO began explaining the situation in a calm, measured voice. He described the flight attendant's behavior, the moldy food, and the dismissive tone she had used. He mentioned the underhanded comments he had overheard and explained why he believed they were rooted in bias. He presented the photograph of the food and detailed the exact times and interactions he had noted during the flight. His tone was steady and professional, never raising his voice, but leaving no doubt about the severity of the problem. The manager listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. She nodded as he spoke, acknowledging the professionalism and how he had handled the situation despite the disrespect he had endured. The CEO explained that he understood mistakes happened, but that serving spoiled food was dangerous, and the racial undertones in the behavior were unacceptable. He emphasized that accountability was necessary to prevent future incidents. Other passengers began to gather nearby, noticing the discussion. Some had witnessed the flight attendant's behavior themselves, and a few came forward to add their observations. The CEO welcomed their input, letting them explain what they had seen without dominating the conversation. It became clear that the flight attendant had not only been unprofessional toward him, but had also shown impatience and rudeness to other passengers. This corroboration strengthened his case and highlighted that her behavior was a pattern, not an isolated incident. The manager promised to conduct a full investigation. She explained that the airline had strict policies regarding passenger safety and professionalism, and that the behavior he had described violated both. The CEO asked to be informed of the results of the investigation and made it clear that he expected proper action to be taken. The manager assured him that the matter would be handled seriously and thanked him for remaining calm and professional, even under provocation. The CEO then took a moment to reflect on the broader implications of the situation. He had faced bias before, but he believed that speaking up in a controlled and respectful manner could create change. He knew that reacting with anger would have undermined his credibility and possibly allowed the flight attendant's behavior to go unpunished. Instead, he had used calm documentation and clear communication to ensure that the airline understood the gravity of the situation. Once the initial conversation was over, the CEO made his way through the airport, preparing mentally for his business meeting. Even though the flight incident was frustrating, he focused on the tasks ahead, maintaining the same level of discipline he applied to his company. His assistant caught up with him, noticing the tension, and he briefly explained the situation. She offered support and reminded him that he had handled it exactly as he should, with dignity and authority. While walking to the car, he thought about the impact of his actions on others. Standing up against bias was not just for his own sake, he realized. It sent a message to anyone witnessing it, showing that professionalism and integrity mattered more than anger or confrontation. He hoped that by addressing the situation properly, it would encourage the airline to enforce stronger standards for its staff and create a safer, more respectful environment for future passengers. Back at the office, the CEO received a follow-up call from the airline's manager. She explained that they had begun reviewing the flight incident in detail, including testimonies from other passengers and staff, as well as the photograph he had provided. The CEO listened attentively, asking questions about the timeline and what steps were being taken to ensure accountability. He made it clear that he expected transparency and fair action, emphasizing that this was a matter of safety, respect, and professional conduct. As the day went on, the CEO began to focus on his work again, but the incident remained on his mind. He understood that the investigation might take time, but he felt confident that documenting everything and handling the situation calmly would lead to a positive outcome. He reviewed the company's ongoing projects, conducted meetings with his team, and made strategic decisions, all while keeping a level head. The contrast between the chaos on the flight and his composed leadership in the office was striking. But he knew that maintaining calm under pressure was one of his greatest strengths. Later, he met with a colleague to discuss a new initiative. The conversation turned briefly to the airline incident, and he shared his experience in a way that highlighted professionalism, accountability, and the importance of standing up for oneself without aggression. His colleague listened carefully, impressed by the CEO's ability to turn a frustrating situation into a lesson in leadership and personal integrity. As evening approached, the CEO reflected on the lessons from the flight. He realized that discrimination and negligence could appear in subtle ways, and recognizing them required attention and awareness. He was proud that he had addressed the situation without losing his composure. The experience reinforced his belief that proper documentation, calm confrontation, and clear communication were powerful tools for change. That night, before heading to bed, he received another update from the airline. They had confirmed receipt of all his documentation and promised a thorough investigation. The CEO replied with a polite acknowledgement, reiterating his hope that appropriate action would follow. He felt a sense of closure for the day, knowing he had done everything possible to address the situation responsibly. As he prepared for sleep, his thoughts lingered on the people around him who might benefit from seeing this example. He considered how others facing similar disrespect could learn from the way he had handled the incident. It was not about revenge, he thought, but about creating standards for behavior that respected everyone, regardless of background or status. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions could influence change and encourage accountability. By the next morning, the CEO was ready to move forward. The business meeting awaited, and he approached it with the same focus and discipline he brought to every challenge. Yet he carried with him the knowledge that the airline incident would be addressed, that the flight attendant would face consequences, and that standing firm with professionalism had been the right choice. The experience on the plane had been frustrating and unfair, but it had also provided an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, integrity, and courage in the face of disrespect. Throughout the day, he occasionally reflected on the incident, thinking about how simple actions, calm observation, careful documentation, and respectful confrontation could make a real difference. He hoped that others would see that dealing with bias effectively required patience, focus, and the willingness to address problems without letting emotions take control. The CEO knew that real change came from persistence, professionalism, and the courage to act when something was clearly wrong. By the evening, he finally felt a sense of peace about the situation. The airline was investigating, other passengers had witnessed his professionalism, and he had maintained his integrity throughout. He had turned a potentially humiliating experience into a demonstration of calm authority and leadership. As he closed his laptop and prepared to rest, he felt confident that the incident would be resolved appropriately, and that the lessons learned would extend far beyond a single flight. Once the investigation was underway, the CEO continued his daily routine with a sense of quiet resolve. He knew that the real test would come when the airline made its final decision. In the meantime, he focused on his work, meetings, and strategic planning, but he also kept the incident in mind, preparing for the moment when he would need to ensure that proper action was taken. The airline's management team was thorough. They reviewed all evidence, including the photograph of the moldy food and the CEO's detailed notes. They spoke to other passengers who had witnessed the incident and interviewed the flight crew. Slowly, it became clear that the flight attendant's behavior had not only been unprofessional, but also biased. The airline recognized the seriousness of the situation and the potential risks involved in both safety and customer experience. Meanwhile, the CEO remained patient. He understood that change did not happen instantly and that systems had to follow proper procedures. He communicated with the airline when necessary, ensuring that all information was accurate and that his concerns were clearly understood. He never raised his voice or demanded immediate results, knowing that professionalism and calm persistence were more effective than anger. As days passed, he received updates from the airline confirming that they were reviewing the flight attendant's record and performance history. The CEO felt reassured that his documentation had made an impact. The evidence he had collected was precise and credible, leaving no room for dismissal of the matter. He also appreciated the support of passengers who had spoken up, showing that collective voices could help reinforce accountability. At the same time, the CEO reflected on the impact of the flight on other passengers. Families had been affected, students traveling for school had been uncomfortable, and the overall mood of the cabin had been tense because of the flight attendant's behavior. He understood that taking action was not just about addressing his own experience, but about ensuring a safe and respectful environment for all passengers in the future. His approach was not personal revenge. It was about responsibility and standards. The airline eventually invited the CEO to a private meeting with senior management. They wanted to discuss the findings of their investigation and the actions that would follow. The CEO arrived prepared, bringing all relevant documentation and recounting his experience clearly. He remained calm and composed, demonstrating both confidence and patience. The executives acknowledged his professionalism and expressed gratitude for his detailed reporting. During the meeting, the airline presented the evidence they had gathered, including testimonies from passengers and other crew members. It became evident that the flight attendant had indeed shown discriminatory behavior and had failed to follow basic service and safety protocols. The CEO listened carefully, asking questions to ensure that the investigation was thorough and fair. He wanted to make sure that the outcome would reflect accountability and not just a superficial response. The executives explained that the flight attendant's employment status would be reviewed and that disciplinary action was likely. The CEO emphasized the importance of enforcing proper standards for all employees, noting that allowing unprofessional behavior to go unchecked could have serious consequences for passengers and the airline's reputation. He spoke about safety, respect, and the need to prevent similar incidents in the future. His words were firm but measured, reflecting his understanding of leadership and influence. After the meeting, the CEO returned to his office feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. He knew that the airline had the power to make the final decision, but he also felt confident that his approach had ensured that the situation would be addressed properly. He thought about the subtle ways bias could appear in professional settings and the importance of addressing it calmly yet firmly. He realized that documentation, patience, and respectful confrontation were powerful tools for creating meaningful change. Throughout the following days, the CEO continued to receive updates. The airline confirmed that they had reviewed the flight attendant's personnel record, which revealed prior complaints about attitude and service. They were taking this incident seriously, and the CEO's calm professionalism had reinforced the need for decisive action. He felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that his approach had not only addressed his personal experience but also contributed to improving the overall environment for future passengers. The CEO also reflected on the broader lessons from the incident. He thought about how individuals in positions of power could influence positive change without resorting to aggression or confrontation. By remaining composed and documenting events carefully, he had created a credible case that demanded accountability. He knew that this approach could serve as an example for others who might face similar situations in their personal or professional lives. As the investigation continued, the CEO stayed focused on his company. He led meetings, reviewed strategic plans, and mentored his team, applying the same principles of calm leadership and decisive action he had used in addressing the flight incident. The contrast between handling everyday business challenges and confronting bias on the flight highlighted his ability to maintain composure in difficult situations. The airline eventually reached a decision. They determined that the flight attendant's behavior was unacceptable and warranted termination. The CEO received a formal communication outlining the actions taken, along with an apology for the incident. He felt a sense of closure, knowing that his careful documentation and professional handling had led to real consequences. The airline also committed to additional training for staff to prevent similar incidents in the future, showing that accountability could lead to systemic improvement. Reflecting on the resolution, the CEO felt a deep sense of pride in how the situation had been managed. He had faced disrespect and bias with dignity, maintained his professional integrity, and ensured that proper action was taken. The experience reinforced his belief that standing firm, calmly and strategically could create meaningful change. He recognized that leadership was not just about managing a company, but also about setting an example for how to handle injustice with intelligence and composure. He also thought about the passengers who had witnessed the incident. Their support and recognition of his professionalism had been meaningful, demonstrating that calm leadership could inspire respect and solidarity. The CEO realized that addressing bias effectively required both personal integrity and the willingness to take action, even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. The experience had strengthened his confidence in his ability to influence positive outcomes in challenging situations. In the weeks that followed, the CEO shared lessons from the incident with trusted colleagues and peers. He spoke about the importance of documenting events, remaining calm under pressure, and addressing problems respectfully but decisively. His story became an example of how to confront bias and negligence without losing composure or compromising professionalism. It highlighted the power of thoughtful action and clear communication in creating accountability. Ultimately, the resolution of the flight incident had broader implications. The airline's decision to terminate the flight attendant and implement additional training sent a clear message about standards of behavior and accountability. The CEO's calm and professional approach had not only resolved his personal experience but also contributed to a safer, more respectful environment for future passengers. The experience reinforced his belief that integrity, patience, and careful action could produce lasting change in both personal and professional contexts. After the airline concluded its investigation, the CEO received official confirmation about the actions that would be taken. The flight attendant had been found to have acted unprofessionally and with bias, and the airline had decided to terminate her employment. Along with the decision, they sent a formal apology acknowledging the seriousness of the situation and expressing gratitude for his professionalism. The CEO read the letter carefully, appreciating the clarity and responsibility in the response. It was a moment that brought a quiet satisfaction. He had approached the situation calmly, and the outcome reflected the standards he valued. The CEO took time to reflect on the process. He remembered how he had remained composed during the flight despite frustration and humiliation. He recalled documenting everything meticulously, knowing that evidence would be crucial. He realized that his approach had set a standard not only for the airline staff but also for the passengers who witnessed the events. He had shown that confronting discrimination and negligence could be done firmly, yet with dignity. At the office, he shared a summary of the situation with a few close colleagues, emphasizing the lessons learned. He spoke about the importance of documenting incidents, remaining calm under pressure, and addressing problems in a professional manner. His story highlighted that leadership was not just about making business decisions, but also about standing up for fairness and accountability. The colleagues were inspired, recognizing that even in unexpected situations, one could influence positive outcomes through thoughtful actions. The CEO also considered the broader implications of the airline's decision. The termination of the flight attendant sent a message to all staff about the standards expected on flights. The airline had publicly committed to additional training for crew members, focusing on professionalism, respect, and awareness of unconscious bias. He felt a sense of accomplishment knowing that his actions contributed to a system that would prevent similar incidents in the future. This reinforced his belief that addressing problems carefully and strategically could create lasting change. While the CEO returned to his regular routine, he remained mindful of the experience. He reflected on the small ways bias could appear and how easily it might be ignored if not confronted. He understood that standing firm in such moments was not about confrontation for its own sake, but about setting a precedent. He considered how passengers, crew members, and even others in professional environments could benefit from seeing the power of calm, documented, and respectful action. News of the incident quietly spread through social media, as a few passengers had shared their experiences. People admired the CEO's composure and methodical approach. Unlike stories that escalate into chaos or public shaming, this one was about patience, professionalism, and accountability. The CEO did not seek attention, but he realized that his actions had inspired others to recognize that addressing injustice was possible without losing dignity. The positive response reinforced his belief in the importance of principled behavior. The CEO also thought about the passengers on the flight. Many of them had witnessed the behavior of the flight attendant and the way he responded. Families, business travelers, and students were reminded of the importance of civility and respect. Some had even taken mental notes for themselves, seeing that remaining calm and collected could influence outcomes in difficult situations. The CEO found satisfaction in knowing that his example had a subtle but meaningful impact on those around him. The airline continued to reach out, updating him on the implementation of new training protocols and improved monitoring of staff behavior. The CEO felt that this was a step in the right direction. He had always believed that accountability worked best when paired with education and prevention. By contributing to a system where professional conduct was emphasized and bias was actively addressed, he realized he was helping create safer and more respectful experiences for all passengers. In his personal life, the CEO shared some reflections with family and friends. He did not dwell on anger or resentment, but he emphasized the importance of preparation, composure, and clear communication when facing unfair treatment. He wanted others to understand that reacting impulsively could undermine their position, while thoughtful, deliberate action could lead to meaningful results. His story became a teaching moment for those close to him, a reminder that integrity and professionalism were powerful tools. The CEO also looked inward, examining his own feelings during the incident. He recognized that the initial frustration he felt was natural, but he had successfully channeled it into constructive action. He took pride in maintaining his calm, collecting evidence, and communicating effectively. The experience reaffirmed his belief that personal discipline and self-control were essential, not just for business but for all aspects of life. Over the following weeks, the CEO continued his work, but the incident remained a reference point in his mind. He reflected on how many small injustices go unnoticed, and how easily they could be tolerated if not addressed. He felt gratified that his actions had set a precedent for accountability, showing that one person's calm and deliberate response could influence systems and policies. He hoped that this would encourage others to stand up for fairness in their own environments. The airline, now implementing new training and monitoring systems, had begun to see improvements in staff behavior. Complaints about service and bias had decreased, and passengers reported a more professional and courteous experience. The CEO observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, knowing that his insistence on proper handling of the incident had contributed to a wider positive impact. He recognized that change often starts with one careful, thoughtful action. He also considered the importance of empathy in leadership. By approaching the situation without anger, he had maintained dignity while demanding accountability. He had treated the airline as a partner in resolving the issue, rather than an opponent. This approach not only led to the desired outcome, but also reinforced a collaborative and respectful tone that influenced how future interactions would unfold. The CEO believed that leadership required both firmness and empathy, and this situation had provided a clear example. As he reflected further, the CEO realized that the incident had taught him about the importance of observation and awareness. Small signs of disrespect or negligence could easily be overlooked, but recognizing them and addressing them promptly could prevent larger problems. By documenting every detail and communicating clearly, he had ensured that the situation would not be ignored. This reinforced his belief in preparation, attention to detail, and the power of a calm, collected approach. The CEO also shared his story with his team, not to boast, but to illustrate the importance of maintaining integrity and professionalism in challenging situations. He emphasized that standing up for fairness required patience, clarity, and evidence, and that reacting impulsively could undermine one's goals. His team appreciated the example, recognizing that these principles could be applied not just in personal encounters, but in the business world as well. Ultimately, the CEO felt a sense of completion. The airline had taken proper action, the flight attendant had been held accountable, and new training measures were in place. More importantly, he had maintained his own integrity and demonstrated how calm, strategic action could lead to real change. The experience had reinforced his understanding of leadership, responsibility, and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it required patience and careful planning. He looked forward to applying these lessons in the future. Whether in business, personal life, or interactions with the broader world, he knew that integrity, patience, and clarity could guide effective action. The flight incident, while frustrating and unfair, had ultimately strengthened his approach to challenges, reaffirming the belief that professionalism and courage were the most effective tools in addressing injustice and creating meaningful change. In the weeks after the airline had acted on the situation, the CEO reflected deeply on the journey from the moment he had been served moldy food to the resolution of the incident. It had been more than a personal confrontation. It had become a lesson in leadership, patience, and the power of professionalism. He understood that standing up to injustice required more than anger. It required strategy, calm observation, and careful communication. He thought about the flight attendant and the way small actions can ripple out. Her neglect and bias had affected not only him, but also other passengers. Families had felt uncomfortable, students had been frustrated, and the overall experience of the flight had been diminished. Yet, by approaching the situation calmly, documenting every detail, and communicating respectfully, he had turned a negative experience into a force for accountability. The airline had taken action, setting a precedent for the future, and this gave him a sense of fulfillment. In his office, he shared the story with senior team members not to boast, but to illustrate principles that mattered in life and work. He spoke about preparation, patience, and clarity of thought. He emphasized that documenting events and maintaining composure allowed individuals to influence outcomes without resorting to conflict or aggression. The team listened intently, understanding that these lessons could be applied in both professional settings and personal life. The CEO also considered the broader lessons for society. Discrimination often comes in subtle forms that can be overlooked or tolerated if no one speaks up. By standing firm and insisting on accountability, he had shown that bias and negligence could not be ignored. He hoped that others, both inside and outside his company, could learn from this example and find ways to address similar issues respectfully and effectively. He reflected on the passengers who had witnessed the incident. Many had expressed admiration for his composure, and some had even commented online about how impressed they were by his calm, decisive action. The CEO had not sought recognition, yet his behavior had inspired others to see that confronting injustice could be done with dignity and integrity. He realized that influence was not always about public statements or grand gestures. Sometimes it was about quiet, consistent actions that demonstrated principles in practice. The airline followed through on their commitment to improve training and staff accountability. New protocols were implemented to ensure that employees understood the importance of professionalism and respect for all passengers. The CEO felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his actions had contributed to this positive change. By approaching the situation responsibly, he had not only addressed his own experience, but had also helped improve the system for countless others in the future. Over time, the CEO noticed a subtle shift in how he handled challenges, both big and small. The incident on the plane had reinforced his belief in calm observation, thoughtful action, and clear communication. He had seen firsthand how these qualities could turn a potentially negative experience into a constructive outcome. He applied these lessons to business decisions, team management, and even personal interactions, understanding that integrity and patience were universally effective tools. He also reflected on the importance of empathy and leadership. By approaching the airline with respect and a focus on problem solving, he had avoided unnecessary conflict while still demanding accountability. This balance of firmness and understanding had allowed him to achieve his goal without creating hostility. The CEO understood that leadership was as much about guiding with empathy as it was about setting standards and enforcing rules. In personal conversations with friends and family, he shared his experience and the principles that guided his actions. He spoke about the value of preparation, documenting events, and maintaining composure under pressure. He emphasized that standing up for fairness was not about confrontation or aggression, but about strategic, respectful action. His story became an example for those around him, illustrating how one can influence outcomes while preserving dignity. The CEO also recognized the importance of reinforcing positive change. The airline's decision to terminate the flight attendant and implement better training showed that accountability worked best when combined with education and prevention. He believed that lasting change required both consequences for misconduct and proactive steps to prevent future problems. His calm, professional approach had made this possible, demonstrating the power of thoughtful leadership. Throughout the process, the CEO remained humble. He understood that the situation could have escalated or become messy, but by staying composed, he had ensured a constructive outcome. He knew that anger or impulsive action might have undermined his credibility or allowed the problem to persist. Instead, he had turned a difficult experience into a lesson in professionalism, patience, and effective problem-solving. He also considered the message this sent to others facing similar situations. Many people experience bias or neglect in their daily lives, often feeling powerless to act. By showing that calm, documented, and respectful action could lead to meaningful results, he hoped to inspire others to address injustices in their own lives. He believed that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and deliberate. As he moved forward in his work and life, the CEO carried these lessons with him. He approached challenges with a renewed sense of confidence, knowing that integrity, preparation, and patience could guide effective action. The incident on the flight, while uncomfortable at the time, had reinforced values he had long held and provided a real-world example of how to confront issues constructively. He also reflected on the broader impact of the situation. The airline had taken responsibility, improved training, and addressed misconduct, benefiting future passengers and employees. The CEO's actions had contributed to this positive outcome, showing that individuals could influence systems when they approached challenges thoughtfully and strategically. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his calm, professional approach had made a difference. In the end, the CEO realized that the experience had been transformative. It was a reminder that integrity and patience were powerful tools in confronting bias and negligence. By maintaining composure, documenting evidence, and communicating clearly, he had achieved accountability without creating conflict. The incident had reinforced his belief in principled action, leadership, and the importance of standing up for fairness in all areas of life.